So good evening, and thank you for joining us for our last MS&E Career Collaborative event. My name is Linda Esquivel, and I serve as the Career and Affiliate Services Officer for MS&E. I will be moderating today's panel session, Women in MS&E, featuring 4 of our wonderful MS&E alums. Our first alum is Candi, Yano, Professor, IEOR, Industrial Engineering Operations Research for the Department and the Haas School of Business at Berkeley. Our second panelist is Adriana, Diener-Veinott, Managing Director at Golden Seeds. Our third panelist is Alice J. Choi, Manager in Business Analytics and Insights at Disney Consumer Products. And our last panelist is Sommer Gentry, Professor of Mathematics at the United States Naval Academy. So I'm going to go ahead and let them give a better introduction of each of themselves. And feel free to submit questions during this panel session, either through the Q&A or the chat, and raise your hand if you actually want to speak, and I can allow you to talk. So that's kind of how it's going to go. So without further ado, I guess I can pass it on to Candace.
So prior to coming to Berkeley as a faculty member, I was at Stanford earning my bachelor's degree in economics, and then I did a master's in OR, and then PhD in industrial engineering. That was at the time when the various departments were split. And I went on to my first job as a member of the technical staff at Bell Labs in New Jersey, and then I was on the faculty at the University of Michigan before coming to Berkeley. And over the course of my career, I've been a department chair, also associate dean, and professionally, I've been really active in various journal editorial positions. My area of research is supply chain management, but I also do a little bit in healthcare and marketing. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Alice, did you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alice Choi, and I currently am the Manager of Business Analytics and Insights for Disney Consumer Products. So providing analytics for key items that sell in the mass market for Disney Consumer Products, and have been there for over 7 years. Prior to that, I was a stay-at-home mom for about 5 years and come from a retail planning and finance background, which was what I entered after graduating from MS&E in the master's program in 2001. Prior to that, I studied chemical engineering at MIT.
Thank you. Sommer, did you want to go next?
Sure. I'm so glad to be virtually back at Stanford. I really loved being an undergraduate there, and I confirmed a master's degree in operations research. And I enjoy teaching operations research a lot. I teach undergraduates at the academy, and my research is on using optimization and simulation to help people get kidney transplants and liver transplants.
Okay, so the next one is Adriana.
Hi, I'm Adriana Diener-Veinott. I also go back to the days when the departments were separate, and I got my PhD in operations research. I started my career in consulting, where I was thrilled to be able to apply a lot of the optimization techniques I learned to real life problems. And specifically, it was around revenue management, and the industry that by luck I ended up working on was freight and logistics. But I also learned throughout those years that a lot of what we do relies on having good data. And I'm talking about 1990s, when a lot of the big shipping companies had mainframes and the data was not good enough or not quantity enough. So I decided that I was going to focus my career and efforts into building the systems that these companies needed to be able to have good data, to then be able to apply all these good optimization models. So that's what I did. I actually started a company with 2 colleagues, and we built reservation systems, pricing systems, operational systems. And we were eventually acquired by Accenture, where I took on the role to lead globally the industry. I actually retired just before the pandemic hit. I am now a managing director at Golden Seeds, which is one of the 3 largest angel investment groups in the US, and the largest focused on funding and supporting women-led companies.
Very nice. Thank you. So the first question is, how has your experience at Stanford prepared you for your career?
Well, I'll start and related to what I just mentioned, right? So right off the bat, I started my career by applying everything I learned. It was all those optimization models, all those simulation techniques. And, you know, as you grow in your career, you may not be doing that on a day-to-day basis for a long time. You start taking on more leadership management roles as well. But besides the techniques and everything we learned, I feel that my career was driven by an analytical approach to whatever is in front of me, whether that's a business problem, whether it is a life problem. And that is foundational, at least for me, what I got out of my career at Stanford. And I believe that everything I have achieved is because of that foundation that operations research and MS&E gives you.
Thank you. Candice, you were raising your hand.
Yes, for me, Stanford I found to be a very warm and supporting place. And so I felt like I could be a student. I came through at a time when there weren't very many women in the graduate program, although there were a fair number of women in the undergraduate program. But I felt that the faculty were very welcoming and supportive. And I had an opportunity to take a lot of courses, I guess not only in industrial engineering operations research, but also in other fields as well. And I feel that the breadth of the background that I was able to get at Stanford from many remarkable departments really has helped me over the years, because when you're in research, you never quite know what it is that you might need to know. And just having more of a foundation really allows you to move from one field to another. I spent 8 years at Stanford, so from my undergraduate through my graduate years in essentially 3 different programs. But I feel that all of them really contributed a lot to my ability to be prepared academically in order to do what I do now.
I can add that I joined the Stanford program in 2000 when it was the tech boom and startups just exploding everywhere. And so being kind of in the heart of Silicon Valley really exposed me to not only the entrepreneurship around us, but really diving in and learning how businesses grew and operated. And kind of like what Candi said, just the exposure to different types of classes, like the classes I took at the Graduate School of Business and how those could apply to, some of the lessons, and just really having exposure to transitioning from technology into business. This really gave that forum and exposure.
So I think we kind of already answered how did you get to be where you are now professionally in the intro, but did you face any challenges being a woman in a particular field or in academia?
I'll go. I actually didn't. However, never in the US or the Western countries, but I did find my career had me abroad a lot. So I got to work with clients in Asia, Europe, Latin America. And I found cultural differences that sometimes did provide an environment that was not as conducive to feeling comfortable.
I was going to add that I have occasionally had problems with individuals that I've worked with in my career who have treated me badly, have said inappropriate things, focused on what I look like explicitly, and what they're talking about. They're only talking about what I look like and not the content of my research presentation. And when those things happen, I find that what really helps is when someone else in the room steps up and objects to the behavior. And I've had those kinds of people willing to advocate for me. So that's been a joy, that it's usually just one person sort of trying to be my way.
And Candace, did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I was the first female faculty member in the Industrial and Operations Engineering Department at the University of Michigan when I joined. And at that time, I think before I joined, there were 6 women faculty throughout the whole College of Engineering. The year I joined, 6 women were hired. So it doubled the number of women, but as a percentage, it was still quite small. And so I think although I would say that most of the men were pretty progressive and open, not really discriminatory, there were some things that I really had to do as a trailblazer just because I was the first woman. But I can't say that I experienced a lot of discrimination, but there were little things. Okay, so I'll give you an example. In a tight budget year, the department chair says, "Well, it looks like we may have to have people share rooms at what was then Orsa Tim's conference." But then I raised my hand and I said, "Well, I don't think so." He says, "Oh no, you can have your own room, at the hotel." And so there were little things where I just sort of had to point out that maybe I needed to be treated differently in order to be treated equally or to be treated fairly. And there are various times when I could tell that certain other people were just not accustomed to dealing with a woman, or they didn't understand that, maybe I had the primary job and my husband was willing to follow me. This is something that has come up a lot. And so sometimes one just has to figure out polite ways to make people aware of things that they are assuming that are not necessarily true.
My first job out of Stanford was in investment banking, and it happened to be that the office that I was in was fairly male dominated, just in terms of numbers. So I got to know the admin staff very well. They were all females, and I could have that rapport with them. But I did state at one point that I thought that maybe the projects that were available to me were slightly, maybe not as high profile as some of the projects that some of the males were getting. And I made that bold statement only to eventually leave that company. But I have to share that one of my colleagues that was a year behind me shared with me that by my stating that, it actually opened up the door for her and her access to projects afterwards. So they definitely took in that feedback and corrected for it. So it was definitely stepping out in terms of providing that kind of feedback. But in that sense, I kind of planted that seed, and I think it definitely changed the environment from that point forward.
Thank you. So this question is for our panelists that are in academia. What inspired you to pursue a career in research and teaching?
So I guess that would let me talk first. So I am in academia, and really what drove me is I wanted to teach. I kind of felt that teaching was my calling. I have, had as my job from the very beginning, teaching people how to do math. That's always been what I did and what I was good at. So I really wanted to become a professor. And I actually found that in some ways, some people within academia have like a single metric of the only thing that's important is research, but I really don't think that anyone should think that way, and that like different faculty members are great at teaching, great at research. I enjoy doing all of those things, but if teaching is what drives you, it can be a really wonderful thing to have a career in academia.
I can go next. And so I think I learned early that I tend to get bored quickly. And so even if I'm working very hard, I feel like I need intellectual stimulation. And, for different people, it comes in different forms. But for me, being able to do research that I choose most of the time really made a big difference. And I worked in industry for long enough to sort of to confirm that. I really appreciate the opportunity I had to work in industry, but I find that now, being able to do research, and I actually supervise a lot of student projects, and that really gives me kind of exposure into what's going on in industry at the same time. But I can do that, to whatever degree I choose. It's not like I have to do it all the time. And I also enjoy teaching. I really enjoy imparting knowledge, kind of prepare people for the next generation of people who are going to go out there and change the world. So I like all of that. But I do a lot of service too, but this is not my most favorite part of my job.
Thank you, Candace. What advice would you give to students starting their careers now, whether it's in industry, tech, or academia?
I could take that one. I think that just understand nothing's set in stone. And, I've had a very windy path. I started out in finance, found the world of retail planning, and now doing that in a different format with consumer products. And just because you pick one path, to start out in, don't think that you're stuck. There's always going to be other opportunities to evolve yourself. And so, while it might be a difficult choice, it's not the end all be all. And there will always be new possibilities out there.
And I would say, make sure that you're doing something that you really feel is a contribution to the world. I wouldn't make decisions about your career, based on money. I've had the good fortune to be able to choose what I wanted to do. And so I chose never to work on weapons. I chose not to work in day trading and, things that I didn't think were actually making the world a better place. And instead I said, you know what, I really want to work on science. I want to work on healthcare. I want to, find ways to make people's lives better. And that was really important to me. So decide what's important to you, but probably like the dollar figure is not actually the right way to choose a career.
I'm going to ask one of the questions that a student submitted when they registered, and I think it's a good question. At what point in your career did you decide to pursue an advanced degree and why? So this could be a master's or the PhD program.
For me, it was straight out of school. So I finished my undergraduate, and I knew that I wanted a specialization in something that was both. My undergrad was in math, and I wanted something that was a combination of applying, advanced science to real life problems. And I found OR was the place. I asked which was the best place to study that. It was Stanford, and that was the answer.
Candice, did you want to add to that?
I think I decided probably the end of my junior year, because one has to take all of the standardized exams and so forth to prepare to apply. But at that point in time, I was not so specific as to what I wanted to do. And so it's actually Professor Veinott who convinced me to apply for the PhD program in OR at that point in time. And so I hadn't really thought about it. There was one point when I must have been a sophomore, and one of my teaching assistants wrote on an exam, "You should consider applying to graduate school." And so, certainly at that point in time, I was not thinking about it, but I'm certainly glad I did. But to be honest, I'm not sure that I actually fully decided to go completely for the PhD until after my first year of graduate school, because you're mostly just taking classes and you kind of have to get a feel for what is research about. And I don't, by the end of the first year I had a feeling for that, but I would say that prior to that I didn't have much experience. So I think maybe the point is that you have to give yourself time. And I mean, these days, if you're going to stay in any area of the world where there's a lot of technology, then having that master's degree at least really opens doors that would not be available otherwise.
Anyone else, or we can move on to the next question? Okay. So another student submitted question was, do the expectations from leaders differ for male and females in your experience?
Maybe not overtly. I think that probably the expectation would be that there would be close similarities between a male leader and a female leader. But I think sometimes females could be under the microscope a little bit more if they show a little more emotion or a different kind of reaction to certain things. And so I think that there's a little bit of more pressure in that sense. But no, I wouldn't say in my experiences that just because I'm a female, there were different bars set for me.
So the next question is, how has the pandemic affected your work or your research?
I've been teaching online now for a year, and I'm thrilled about it. I actually found new ways to change my delivery, involve my students in a more active participation in class than before. I had them working on collaborative Google documents and breaking out into groups, and I had these like online quizzes, and then they would discuss the answers. I think it's really fun, and it kind of forced me to refresh whatever I was doing pedagogically in the classroom. So I thought it was a silver lining and a great opportunity to rethink teaching. So I've enjoyed it.
Candace?
I think for me, I've enjoyed it to some extent, but I find it extremely time consuming. Okay, there's just a lot of administrative aspects, technological aspects that end up taking enormous amounts of time. And so I would say it's like twice as long, 2.5 times as long as normal. And so it's that aspect of it that I think has been kind of difficult. And the students, they don't see what goes on behind the scenes, although, they're also kind of suffering from the Zoom fatigue and so forth too. So I don't know, I really do prefer in-person teaching. I like that direct interaction with the students. So all things equal, I'm certainly hoping that's what we're facing in the fall.
And in terms of, Alice, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say, as a working mom, it has definitely changed dynamics and the workday. In a sense, you can't just fully throw yourself into work for 8+ hours straight, because you need to feed your children, or they have a question about homework, or that sort of thing. So it's definitely a lot more blended throughout the day. But at the same time, you get the quantity time with your child, and hopefully some quality time as a result of that. And you actually, in a sense, become a little more available to work as well, because you have some flexible hours. It might be overall a longer day, but you might be able to answer something, that's urgent if you happen to be online. So it's definitely a new dynamic.
So we have a question that somebody submitted, and it was actually going to be my next question, is how have the panelists managed work and home life balance, especially if you have kids? Sommer?
Well, I don't have any children, which was partly a decision because I really wanted to have a lot of time to pursue my obsessive hobby, which is partner dancing. I do swing dancing and country dancing and salsa and tango, and I just love it. And so I spend like so many hours a day working on my dancing and enjoying it. And I think I remember talking to a colleague about it. She said she loved ballroom dancing, but she didn't have time for it anymore in her career. And she was a professor like me. And I said, you might be setting a bad example for your students, teaching them that they can't have the things that they want if they pursue this career. And that's not really a very good lesson. So I've said that it's really important to carve out time for what you want in life, whether that's children or just the things that you choose to pursue outside of work.
I mean, if anything, Sommer, I really respect your decision, because I think that, especially with parenting and just any kind of family obligations, it's about trade-offs, and you understood that not to bite off more than you can chew. I think, especially with being a working parent, sometimes it's extremely overwhelming, and it's the truth. You have to be able to prioritize, and sometimes you give up, one aspect. It could be career advancement in my case, when I was at home for 5 years, to, push for a different priority. So in that sense, it is important to know what you can take on.
Candace, did you want to add to that?
Sure. To be honest, I don't think I've ever had much balance in my life, but I like what I do. And so, part of it just depends on, what's important to you. And so, I don't know, my students say that I work too much, and sometimes they choose not to become faculty members because they think they will have to face the same thing. And I understand that's a problem, but it's okay. Like I'm happy in this mode of operation, so that's all right.
So the next question is from students when they registered is, what experiences can we seek at Stanford to prepare ourselves to be successful and confident women in the workplace? Maybe just in life in general too, but.
I'll try to answer that. I was thinking about these issues, and sometimes you get lucky. Things happen in your life, or opportunities arise, and you need to be careful and thoughtful about it. But sometimes just need to take some risk and take advantage of those opportunities. And so I think back to things that happened in my life, and sort of occasionally went out on a whim to do things that people would say, oh, it's too early in your career to do that. But I think that it really did kind of help me professionally. It allowed me to get connected with people I wouldn't have met otherwise. And so, and I think that all of that in a profession where these connections are very important in terms of research collaborations and so forth, has been really helpful. So, another thing I wanted to mention, just following on what somebody else said earlier, I think it's very important to find an organization that aligns with your own value system, and where what the organization values is aligned with what you feel that you can deliver. Okay, and so you're valued, and you feel that you can be successful in that domain. I already had to fight the obvious battles up front, being the first woman at many things, that I sort of decided that I wasn't going to constantly swim upstream, that I was going to find a place where I was happy, and they were happy with what I was doing, and they were not asking me to do a lot of what I didn't want to do, and all of that. But I think that, even in a tight job market, there's always opportunities out there. And so I just encourage you to think about the possibility of, making choices that are aligned with your own values.
So there's another question, and I think it kind of piggybacks off the last question, but what gives you confidence or guidance when you lacked it some point in your career or profession?
I remember having kind of an epiphany about imposter syndrome when I was a PhD student. I was feeling imposter syndrome, which is a very familiar sensation that maybe I don't belong here, maybe it was a mistake that I got in, maybe I really can't handle it. And I suddenly realized I actually couldn't handle what I was doing. It was too much for me, but that's because I was a student and I was trying to learn a lot of things, and I wasn't born knowing them. And that imposter syndrome wasn't a signal that I was in the wrong place or that I wasn't capable. It was a signal that, okay, I need to learn something. There's lessons here. There are people to seek out and get help from. And, I have a lot to learn, and it might take a while to do that, but it doesn't at all mean that I don't belong here.
Did anybody else want to add?
I would say I probably suffer from overconfidence, so might not be the most qualified to answer this question. But over time, as I mature, I realize that there are things I don't know. So the confidence that I gained was the ability to bring others when I don't have the answers or I don't know what to do. And you learn from seeing how others do it. So that's how you gain that confidence.
So we have a question submitted anonymously, and it says, given how applied OR MS&E can be as a discipline, is there a value in pursuing a PhD for those of us ultimately interested in industry rather than academia?
Well, I'm an example of that, so I will speak to that absolutely. I think the level of maturity and comprehension that I was exposed to in those 4 years throughout the PhD is what gave me that confidence that I could go and solve these problems, that I could conquer the business world. So just the fact, I think if I had done a master's in 1 year, maybe it would not have been the same career, or maybe I would have taken much longer to get to where I wanted to be, in the sense of having that confidence and having the ability to execute.
I agree with that. I would say about 2/3 of the PhDs coming out of the IOR department at Berkeley are going into industry, and they're going to work for Google, Facebook, Apple, Uber, you name it. And what those companies need is really advanced methods to solve their problems. And so although you may be able to do some of it with a master's degree or maybe grow into it after a master's degree, I think that, I see my own students, going out to head up a team, doing something that's really quite advanced. And because they've had this research training, they're able to do that. So it does open a lot of doors that at the outset that wouldn't be available to a typical person getting just a master's degree.
Thank you, Candace. So speaking of trends, what trends or insights could you give about your profession and field? Especially now that we're kind of living in the remote work life. Alice?
Yeah, I could speak to the world of consumer products when everything shut down and, our business is dependent on retail activity, and that was somewhat non-existent a year ago. Everything converted to online, and we saw a really big transition of business moving to e-commerce, and it accelerated the potential for e-commerce growth by 5 years. So the expectations and projections that the industry was giving on the progress of e-commerce and percentage of e-commerce being to the total had grown significantly overnight. And in that sense, it definitely put a lot of visibility towards the growth of e-commerce and made more traditional businesses have to learn how to get onto e-commerce. So that's probably one of the biggest focuses, I would say, for any retail company right now. And really just constant innovation, especially in the entertainment space, trying to find new ways to sell somewhat of the same thing in a different way.
And I can say that within education, one of the trends from this last year has been a real focus on anti-racist pedagogy in the classroom. And I have enjoyed learning about the fact that, for the students that maybe had a weaker preparation when they came in, the kinds of things that help them the most, like active learning, like grading strategies that don't rank students against each other, but judge them against a standard, the kind of thing where you're not competing against your classmates for a grade, but you're actually just competing against learning what's necessary in the room. Approaches like extremely supportive, offering extra time for people. All of those things help everyone learn, and not just underserved minorities, but it's been really exciting to see a lot of people getting a new education about how what goes on in their classrooms can contribute to sustaining or dismantling systemic racism.
Adriana, or sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I'm not sure I'm going to call this an industry in terms of trends. As I stated, I am now an angel investor. And what I can say about that is it's been in the last 1 year, things have exploded. So just like Alice was saying, everything's going online, digital. Now everything is going startup. So the number of people who suddenly had extra time on the side or lost their jobs, we saw an explosion of companies coming through. But we also saw an explosion of people willing to invest at such early stage. So the number of angel investors, whether you want to call it, crowdsourcing, crowd investing, whatever it is, Shark Tank, whatever, the reality is that there are a lot of people who are willing to help and invest in the ideas and the dreams of many people. So I think it's been the innovation we have seen in the last 15, 18 months is unbelievable. And if anything, I think the other important thing about where the innovation is happening, of course, it's across the board, but one thing that's been really accelerated is innovation in health. And with what's happened with how quickly we've been able to produce a vaccine, that has also opened the door for the FDA doing all sorts of expedited or accelerated, or there are some technical terms I don't remember, but that they are granting and encouraging the trials and approvals happening a lot more quickly. So I expect that, so that happens in areas other than health, commercial areas, but innovation has accelerated tremendously, and the willingness to invest has also.
Candace, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I noticed that students in particular are much more interdisciplinary in their mindset these days. It's not unusual. A huge percentage of students are doing double majors in quite disparate fields. And so it means that they're broader, and they're, you know, they may pursue, they may be getting engineering degrees, but they may pursue interest in a completely different sector than what we might think. And in particular, I would say that this generation of students is really very socially conscious. And so they're very concerned about doing things that are good for society, both here in the United States and abroad. And I think this is good. They all have good hearts, and I like that.
Thank you. So I want to leave some time for our attendees to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat, raise your hand in the Q&A. But I really want to take some time. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And if nobody has any questions, then I will ask another question from our list of questions. So I guess in terms of professional networking, like what would your advice be for a student trying to network and broaden their connections, and, you know, especially for students who may be shy? How do you go about that?
So especially if you're on the shy side, join groups. So there are groups for everything. There's probably some tennis club and chess group and cooking. I mean, this is how you build your connections. So you don't need to think that all your connections need to be super highly academic at this moment, especially if you are at Stanford, where you have, you're all getting started, and where you're all going to end up, we don't know. So you have an opportunity to really be part of a group without having that awkwardness of, having to meet one-on-one, or if you are shy. So look for groups, clubs. That's the best way, and it doesn't have to be all people in engineering or in your department. So look broadly, because in the future your network will be that broad.
Oh, we have a Q&A question. It says, what advice would you have for someone about to start a PhD in OR, or operations research?
I think it's useful to find out what the real expectations are for preparation for a PhD wherever you're planning to go. And every school is different. And there's the obvious stuff that's on the webpage, but there's also the more hidden information. So, you can talk to the first year students there. They'll tell you a lot about, what you might do between now and the fall to better prepare yourself to start graduate school.
I suppose I would say give yourself grace and decide now that you're always going to keep going, because there are a lot of moments in a PhD program that are hard, and you may feel tempted to say, I don't know if I really am going to go all the way through with this, but you definitely can. It feels like a big hill to climb sometimes, and it's an aspect of research that you don't always know that what you're working on at the moment is going to pan out. Or, okay, I'm going to try really hard to read this research paper. I don't know whether it's actually relevant to what I'm doing or not, but just keep going and keep working and believe in yourself, and decide now that you're just going to take the next step and the next step, and you're going to reach the end of that road. So you'll find the support that you need.
So I have another good question that kind of stems from that, but as a professional, or even just in your educational experience, how do you deal with failure? Do you have any maybe stories about a failure and how you dealt with it? Did you learn from it? Did you grow?
I had an interesting experience my first semester, first term as a graduate student. I had an unnamed professor in a math course who I would say was not the best instructor I've ever had. And so it was really difficult for everybody to learn the material. In fact, he used an absolute grading scale. And on the first midterm, essentially half the class had failed. And so this is a very bad situation. Okay, so we were all, half of us were failures, but we weren't alone. And, part of it is sort of deciding how much you can do and how much you're going to sort of write off. Sometimes you just can't do everything, and sometimes you need to catch up later rather than in real time. But I don't know, I think that part of it is, again, just continuing to work at it, trying to find some sources of support from among your classmates and friends, because they're going through the same thing together. And so I would say that the people I went through my qualifying exam with at the same time, we were very close for a very long time after grad school, just because we were kind of all in it together. And so there's always sources of support, people who are going through the same thing, perhaps your family if they understand, or even your professors are there to, they want you to be successful. And so they are available to you to provide moral support along the way.
I guess I could add, just to try to take calculated risks as you take these risks, especially in the retail planning world that I was in. Fashion can be very fickle, and sometimes we made investments on some fashion pieces that didn't pan out, and we had good data to kind of support our decisions. And so if it did bomb, we could kind of justify why we made those investments and maybe come up with some exit strategies on how to mitigate some of that risk and loss. So it's okay to have failures, better if they're somewhat smaller in size and justified with data and support. And I think more important is how you manage through the failure and kind of do that damage control.
Thank you, Alice. So if anybody has any more questions, feel free to submit them in the chat or the Q&A. There was another question submitted beforehand. How do you advocate for yourself in terms of asking for a raise, or maybe there's an opportunity that's in a leadership role? How would you advise students to go about that?
I think you have to know your audience and make a case about why you deserve a higher position or a leadership role or, a different salary in terms of what that person, needs from you or wants from you, that you make the case about how you're helping reach the goals of the organization. For instance, recently my department chair emailed me and said, "Hey, you should teach an extra course this term." And I sent him back a letter that said, "These are how many students are in I was teaching the capstone courses, and they all do individual projects. And these two courses are already overloaded with students. You want me to be able to give each project my individual attention. And I don't think the students in the capstone class are going to have as good an experience if you assign me to another course." And that was successful in getting what I wanted. So that kind of thing, instead of thinking about it as like in terms of if it's fair for you, but it's how it advantages the organization.
I think it's helpful to have advocates. Okay, no matter where you work, chances are there are people, sometimes men, who can be advocates for you, who can help. And so you may not have to toot your own horn. There may be other people who can do that for you. And sometimes they only need to be aware that they are in a good position to play that role. Okay. And so I can think of, when I went up for tenure, I think that, I did have advocates, and that certainly helped smooth the process. And at various other points in my career, that has been true too, that, I didn't have to go to bat for myself, that there were other people going to bat for me.
So that we actually have a question that was submitted in the Q&A, and it says, any tips on pivoting to different roles, jobs in your career?
I'm probably the one who's pivoted quite a bit here. I think that with, every experience you have, whether it aligns or doesn't align with where you want to be next, you can still draw from those experiences and share how you apply, those experiences to maybe the new role. I came from chemical engineering and didn't choose to work in research or a lab after I graduated, but there are plenty of analytical skills, group work, being able to write well technically. All of that are things that I use to this day. And so being able to make that case as you look for your next opportunity would be really important. And really from any experience, even my being a stay-at-home mom, and those experiences can apply to your next step.
Thank you, Alice. Anyone else before we move on? Okay. So if we have no more questions from the attendees, this would be the last question, unless another question pops up. But and everybody can answer this, any other words of advice before we end?
All right. Your career is going to be long. You're going to get started and it's going to go on for a long time. And I think somebody in the panel said it earlier, go where your heart is and feel that you're making a contribution. Nothing is as rewarding as that. There is no money that can compare to the satisfaction that you made a difference to somebody or to a problem or to a company. So that's as simple as it gets.
Alice, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I think it's I think for me, the theme is nothing is final. So constantly find ways to improve yourself and evolve. Find new ways to learn new things and apply them not only in your professional world, but your personal world, and just continue to find ways to grow.
Candace?
I think it's important to be doing things that you find satisfaction in. Okay, and to a large degree, it doesn't matter if everybody else values it. What matters is what makes you happy. And being a Stanford graduate, you can pretty much do anything you want to do. It's just a matter of finding the right thing and pursuing it. So I want to wish all of you well, all of the students, and very, very sad that I'm 50 miles away and I really can't be there in person.
Sommer?
Well, I was going to say my small piece of advice is get great at writing. Writing is such a useful skill in almost any career. Really, any career that any of you are going to have is going to require writing. And I have a book to recommend, which is called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. And in it, one of the best passages is a draft of the book that he shows with all of the crosses and circlings and extraneous words deleted. Study it carefully because direct, concise, active writing is so exciting for people to read, and it'll be very powerful for you. So that's my recommendation.
So thank you, ladies. Thank you, attendees. And this concludes our event for tonight.